begin.
How's it going, fellow members of DCU Nation? This is the real Brad Bell coming back at you with another tour of the DC Universe hardcover review. Today we're going to be looking back at one of the seminal events of the mid-2000s, not just in DC Comics, but in all of comic books. That is Brad Meltzer and Rags Morales' Identity Crisis. Now this, going back, was one of my favorite stories when I was first getting in the comics about 2004, 2005, when this book came out. And it's a book that's really stuck with me ever since. At the time, it was critically acclaimed. Brad Meltzer is a writer of children's books, but most notably, he is a writer of political thrillers and things of that nature. I haven't read any of his other work outside of comics, but he's not a normal comics writer, say like a Jeff Johns or a Brian Michael Bendis or somebody like that. Brad Meltzer came to DC, did Identity Crisis. He set up a run on the Justice League, which lasted about 12 issues, so about a year. And then he left. He did his time in the comic books industry and went back to focusing on his novels and whatnot. But his work cannot be discounted just because he's not a normal comic books writer. Identity Crisis is unique when you talk about the DC Crisis up until Tom King's Heroes in Crisis came out a couple years ago. Now, when you hear the term crisis in DC Comics specifically, you think of these world-altering events. And I do want to do a video down the line kind of differentiating the different crises and my thoughts on those. So I'm not going to dive too deep into that right now. But just know, Heroes in Crisis by Tom King and this book, specifically Identity Crisis, they're not necessarily world-altering or multiversal altering, but they are these histories that change things within the DC mythos on a much more personal level rather than a cosmic level. So what I have here, as we're going to review this hardcover, I am going to spoil some parts of this book, so if you haven't read Identity Crisis, go check it out and come back and watch this video later. And this will probably be something we will cover on the Tour of the DC Universe podcast down the line. Now, Tour of the DC Universe podcast is live on Apple iTunes now. You can go and subscribe. The first episode is dropping the last Thursday, July 2020. And of course, it will be on the Tour of the DC Universe on YouTube that you're watching this video on right now. So just make sure you're checking all that out. And let's go ahead and get into our discussion / review of DC Comics Identity Crisis. What I have here is the original hardcover that was released after the event, and I actually ended up picking this up on eBay for relatively cheap. I got this for $9 plus shipping, so I think I paid about 13 and some change for it, which you can't beat it. This book originally retailed at $24.99, so I got it at roughly half price. There have been several different releases of this book, since this is considered to be one of the must-haves when you're talking about DC books from the 2000s that you need to own. There was this original hardcover. Of course, there's been trade paperbacks and whatnot, but I'm really not going to touch on those. But there was this original hardcover. There then was another hardcover edition that had the cover of issue 1. Then there was a 15th anniversary, I believe, edition of Identity Crisis. Now that one is the one you probably want to get. It's oversized and it has, I think, a little bit higher quality paper, but you're going to be paying a lot of money for that one. I saw it going anywhere from $50 to $100. I think it retailed for like $25, $30 when it came out on the 15th anniversary of Identity Crisis. And then there's the Absolute Edition. Now, I was very close to picking up the Absolute Edition, those beautiful oversized hardcovers DC puts out in the slipcover format. But I decided not to because they say the paper quality from everything I read was not up to snuff, like compared to other DC Absolutes, and there was nothing new. It was essentially this book that was reprinted all the way to the introduction from Joss Whedon, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But here's the book, the cover, very classy here. Got the old DC circle star logo here. Look at the spine, Identity Crisis, Meltzer and Rags Morales. And just a descriptor on the book. Got a quote from the New York Post. It's been ages since you read a superhero comic. Start with this one. And I think this did get a lot of people back in the DC in the mid-2000s. So let's go ahead and carefully take the dust jacket off here. If you look at the interior of the dust jacket, you just have kind of a description of what you're going to get in the book, no spoilers, and then info about the writers and artists here. Here is the front of the book. This is a very simple hardcover. What is cool, it does have the embossed Identity Crisis logo. The thing I like about this logo, and it kind of matches the theme of the book, is it's both modern and classic at the same time. It looks like you're getting maybe a kind of outlandish adventure. That's not what you're getting, but we do get a lot of classic character designs. Identity Crisis embossed, Morales, Meltzer, and just a plain gray back. So let's go ahead and get into the book itself. Classy, plain black there. Paper quality is very good on this. It is not going to be something that's going to be on par with, say, an omnibus, but at the same time, it's going to be better than a trade paperback. You got to decide which version of Identity Crisis you want to pick up, which one's right for you. If you can get that 15th anniversary edition, I recommend it. If not, I think this is a great option on eBay, but you can make that decision at the end of the video if you don't own this. Now, this maybe hasn't aged as well. This is an introduction by Joss Whedon, who actually takes some jabs at Marvel. I believe this was like right before he started doing Astonishing X-Men at Marvel, and of course long before he would become the director of the first Avengers movie and then Avengers Age of Ultron. But he talks about in this intro how this is going to subvert basically every expectation you have of these mythological DC heroes. And while Joss Whedon, his character is coming into question with some of the allegations when he came in to replace Zack Snyder on Justice League, and that movie maybe wasn't as well received as he would have liked it and Warner Bros. Would have liked it to have been. At this time, coming off of Buffy and whatnot, Joss Whedon's name was very, very reputable in the geek world. And this was right before comics and superheroes were going to go really mainstream. So this is a little bit of a different time in comic books. You got that introduction by Joss Whedon. You have the first cover here. You also have the Brad Meltzer and Rags Morales dedications. Very classy presentation. This is a very dark book. Those of you who are not familiar with Identity Crisis or haven't read it, I'm going to flip through and show you some of the stuff you're going to get here. It is essentially a story that focuses on superheroes, their families, and what it means to be a family member, whether that's a wife, whether that's a son, a husband of one of these big time superheroes. And it focuses a lot on Ralph Dibny, the elongated man. You may have seen him in the Flash TV series recently. But at this time, especially, Ralph Dibny is not a household name. And Sue Dibny, his wife, definitely isn't. So to frame the story around these two was something that was kind of outside the box thinking for DC at the time. I'm going to summarize some of the events here that happened in Identity Crisis. It is a murder mystery. Sue Dibny is murdered. We don't know who that is. I'm not going to spoil who that is in this book. There are several people who are pointed to having motivations for killing Sue Dibney, the elongated man's wives. One of those is a character who I would say is a B or C, probably a B list, but maybe you could argue C list villain, known as Dr. Light. And he comes into play because at one point, Dr. Light committed a sexual assault on Sue Dibney in the Justice League Watchtower, as is implied here. And the heroes basically gave Dr. Light a mind wipe, and that is how he went from being, at the time, according to this story, an A-list supervillain on par with somebody like Lex Luthor, to a borderline B or C list. They took his agency, they took his mind, because they didn't want him to go after fellow members of the Justice League family. So it brings a lot of morality into the superhero debate. They did the right thing, but at what cost? You got to keep in mind, this is at the time that a lot of things are going on with the Iraq War, such as Guantanamo Bay, ramping up detainment of terrorists without trials, as well as a lot of surveillance. So it's like, at what's the cost of our freedom? Now, the big thing that comes out of this book that really subverts character expectations is Batman was aware of the assault on Sue Dibney, but he wasn't aware of the mind wipe until he comes back after dealing with a Bat villain, maybe Clayface or somebody I can't remember off the top of my head, and they actually mind wipe Batman, the world's greatest detective. Of course, as Green Arrow, Oliver Queen will point out, Batman knows what he wants to know. So I think my favorite part of this book is twofold. It's the Michael Turner covers, the late Michael Turner. He knocked all these covers out of the park, and they really go well with how each member of the Justice League is used individually and mainly together in this story. But it's the father-son stuff. There are two mirror father-son stories, and I want to see if I can find some of that. There is Boomerang and his son that he finds out that he has. Again, Boomerang, part of the Flash Rogue, so definitely a B or C level villain. And there's the mirror of that with Tim and Jack Drake. Tim Drake being 16, being Robin at this time in DC Comics, and his dad recognizing the calling his son has and trying to get on board and eventually supporting him. Now, I am going to spoil a big part of this book here. So if you plan on reading this is probably my last spoiler of this video. Maybe skip ahead, because I want to show you one of my all-time favorite and most tragic DC panels here. Such great setup by Meltzer and Morales. You have the mirror of the son of Boomerang, and of course you have Tim Drake Robin. And what you're seeing here is their reaction in real time as there's a home invasion from Boomerang into the Drake's household. And it's a race against time for Batman to get Tim Drake home and for Batman to get there. And of course, they don't make it. You have these great, at the beginning, I should mention, of each chapter or issue within Identity Crisis, quotes from the Justice League that really go along great with these stories. Tim Drake doesn't get there in time, and he finds his father dead. And this is the panel, or you could argue splash here, that I was referencing, with Batman just embracing Tim Drake and just saying, "I've got you." And this, when I read it, this really got to me. As I read it now as a father myself, about 10 years later, it touched me even more. So just a lot of great father-son stuff here. Somebody who recently had a son 5 months ago, it really hit home. So I'm just going to kind of flip through the book a little. I'm about halfway through, so this would be a good time to look at the spine. You see, this is not many issues, so it's not like we're talking about an Omni, and this is a used book, but you have a glued spine like you would expect here, so you're not going to get that nice arch that you want in an Omni, but nonetheless, you're getting a very, very good quality edition of this book, and you can search eBay and you can find this thing. If you get lucky, you may find it even cheaper than I do, but let's just flip through a little bit more. Again, my purpose isn't to spoil this, but you just don't know what I'm gonna flip to here. Just a really, really cool stuff at the end as this book wraps up. I want to show you some of that, as I know I'm working kind of backwards here. Now, they really bring home, kind of going to cover here just to avoid any spoilers, stuff with family. You have this great panel between Martha, as she's known now, infamously in pop culture, after BBS, with Clark. You have Connor Hawk and Ollie, rather, not Connor Kent. You have that brotherly relationship between Wally West, definitely older brother, younger brother, and Oliver Queen. You have a lot of these in Batman comics of Bruce visiting his parents' gravesite, but this is one of my favorite, because a lot of times you get just this image, the grave, Batman. You rarely get him unmasking at the gravesite. Also, you rarely get him referencing his parents as mom and dad in such a intimate and informal way. And as Batman being my 1A superhero, that meant a lot to me here. And I love what he says here, as it just recognizes Batman's sense of, here's the world's greatest detective, but he does have some kind of sense of, maybe not religion, but definitely spirituality, when he says, please take care of Jack Drake and our friends too. That kind of brought me to tears. Just a great a mother-son moment here in the cornfields in Kansas between Clark and Ma Kent. I love you, Ma, no matter what. Exactly, Clark. And of course, he hears that with the super hearing. Just that dichotomy between Batman losing his parents and the impact it had on him, and Superman Clark having his parents and the impact that that's had on him. A theme that's ran throughout DC Comics, especially post-Crisis. So you get the epilogue with the advice taken by the elongated man. Don't be afraid to talk to Sue even though she's gone. They hear you. You have a lot of extras here. They're pretty good extras, as you have, okay, who are going to be our main characters? What are each writer's, artist's favorite moments of this iconic story at the time? And they break it down nice. They got the page number here. They debate whether Mind Wipes was the right thing to do. And then again, there's that embrace between Batman and Robin. Here's some great variant cover galleries, sketches. Love that. These all went in to 3rd and 4th printings, and they redid these covers with a red backdrop, kind of, I guess, referencing in a way the red skies and Crisis on Infinite Earths. But I picked up this hardcover because I had all these in single issues at the time when I was collecting single issues, and I sold that collection just focusing on mainly on hardcovers, oversized hardcovers, omnibuses, absolutes, things of that nature. And this is, you know, a book that in my collection that I felt like I had to own. And at the time, it was not only super consequential, but man, this was a book that kind of parsed mainstream media, which was saying a lot for superheroes and Big 2 comics at the time. and this is kind of going to be right around the time or right before Civil War really does that in Marvel. This book, some would argue, hasn't aged well due to some of the treatment of women as far as plot devices or character motivations. I think now this is coming from a perspective of a male, so take that with a grain of salt. And if you disagree with me, feel free to leave it below in the comments. All opinions are respected and welcome here on Tour of the DC Universe. I never felt that there was exploitation in this book, me personally. I felt that any time that horrific things occurred in this book, no matter which characters they were happening to, they weren't just done for shock value. I felt that they were done in a very organic, although horrific in some points, story fashion within the context of this murder mystery / superhero deconstruction that plays off a lot of the things that Alan Moore did in Watchmen, but playing it with DC's main characters rather than the characters Moore had to create. So while some may argue this book doesn't age well in 2020, I would disagree, but that's my personal opinion. So check out Identity Crisis. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure that you're checking out Apple Podcasts because the Tour of the DC Universe is on there now. So make sure you go and subscribe to the podcast. You can find me on Twitter at TheRealBradBell, DREEL Brad Bell. Of course, with this channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, turn on those notifications. You can find us just about anywhere: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at DCU Tour Pod. And until next time, fellow members of DCU Nation, like the great Barbara Gordon said, remember to be your own damn hero.
Our darkness was deep and seemed to swallow all hope. But these heroes were here the whole time to remind us that hope is real, that you can see it